Hey everybody, it's Courtney and welcome to day number 5 of my Mother's Day card series. Today I'll be using 2 stamp sets by Penny Black, and I'll also be using that stencil by Altenew. I started off by taking the stamp from the Awaken set, and I'll be using my Misty here to go ahead and stamp that on a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. This is not a clear stamp, so you have to remember, which I always seem to forget, to take out that foam insert on the Misty before you go ahead and stamp that out. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink to stamp this because I will be Copic coloring my image. Once that was stamped out, I took a piece of Simon Says Stamp masking paper and cut out my image and masked that. I didn't bother to cut out that middle where there's a little gap between the flowers. I figured I'll fill that in with my Copic markers at some point. For my background, I decided to keep it pretty solid, so I'm using the Faded Jeans Distress Oxide inks and one of these blending brushes. I usually use an ink blending tool, but I kind of like the way the look that this brush gives. It kind of gives it a little bit of texture. So I'm just concentrating around the flowers itself and making that my darkest area, and then kind of blending out to the rest of the card panel. Once I was happy with the coverage that I got from the Distress Oxide inks, I went ahead and removed my masks so that we can begin the Copic coloring. I wanted to make my flowers orange, so I am using 3 YR markers. I'm also using a Y marker, which will be my highlight in the end. But I will start off with that just to kind of map out where my darkest areas and where my shadows will be. 2 reasons for this. 1, if I make a mistake, it's okay because this is my highlight color anyway. And number 2, it kind of starts saturating the paper to make blending a little bit easier in the end. The petals on these flowers kind of go in every direction, so sometimes I have to pause and kind of see where my shadows and darkest areas will be on that particular petal. Also, some of these petals have a little fold where they fold over on itself. These areas will also create a shadow. Once I had my lightest color down, I went ahead and moved on to my darkest color and basically went over those same areas where those darkest areas will be. I'm using mostly flicking motions, but where the petals fold over on themselves, I'm usually just barely touching the tip to the paper and just doing a little line where that shadow will be created. After I have my darkest color laid out, I then go on to my 2 mid-tone colors and just extend those areas a little bit further. Usually, again, I use the flicking motion and extend it almost to the edge of the petal, and then I'll go back to my lightest color to create my highlight. For the centers of the flowers, I'm going to be making these brown, and I want a very small area to be the highlight. So my E55 is my lightest. I went over the areas that will eventually be my darkest, then moved on to my E59, then blended that out with an E57, and again, just a little bit of that E55. For the stems, I'm only using two colors here. It's a very small area. I'm using a G82 and a G24. I'm sorry, a G82 and a G28. These are two colors that I use often for leaves and stems. And this stamp has little lines that are built right into it for the stems. So I'm just using those as my shadow areas, just extending those out a bit. Also, any petals of the flowers that may be laying over the stem will also create a shadow. So I'll lay my darkest color there as well. Once that was done, I went over the entire stems with the lightest color again, just to blend them out a little bit. For that middle area, I took my hex chart out here just to kind of match up the color of that Faded Jeans Distress ink. And I just filled that in solid with Copic marker, and you can't really tell the difference. Next, I took another piece of the Neenah Solar White cardstock, also cut down to 5.5 by 4.25, and I wanted to create some stripes just on the one side. So I'm using my stencil here, and typically when I use a stencil and ink blending, I'll take some Post-it note tape just to adhere that to the card panel on the opposite side. Prevents my stencil from shifting around when I'm doing my ink blending. And I use the same Distress Oxide ink in Faded Jeans. For my other panel, I went ahead and just took a 1/2 inch off the one side, just so that a little bit of those stripes will be showing. I took the I Love You Mom sentiment from the Sweetest stamp set by Penny Black, and I'm using my VersaFine ink here to go ahead and stamp that in the top left-hand corner. I use my tape runner here to just adhere that striped panel flat against an A2 size note card. For my main panel, I'll be using Fun Foam to pop that up on the card base. And I'm using Fun Foam here that has adhesive on one side. Usually when I use this, I use the adhesive part on the card panel itself, and then I'll use a strong double-sided tape for me to adhere it to the rest of the card. I did end up adding a few drops of the Clear Nuvo drops once it was all done, just to add a little bit of interest. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I will be back again tomorrow with day number 6 of the Mother's Day card series. Have a great day.